cache and a lot of years background in growing plants in the ground. I grew up with my father running his own nursery, and I learned a lot about roots by working as a child, filling holes for my dad or just playing in the holes in the ground that we dug plants out of. I went off to college at Rutgers, and what they were teaching me at Rutgers, I realized I already learned intuitively because I had dug so many trees out of the ground. I knew that honey locust roots went down, and I knew that cherry trees roots went out, and the types of soil. So stuff that they were teaching me as new research, I'm like, anybody that digs a tree out of the ground knows this. So the knowledge I was able to gain by doing with my hands helped me with my teaching as a college professor later in life, and being a landscaper, and now like doing a lot of gardening. So what we're hoping that we do with this series of presentations is teach you about the plants first, the first series that we did that, and then talk about roots and give roots kind of a personality. You do not need a whole lot of education about how to grow your garden. A lot of it's intuitive, in that if I know what roots want and need, I'll know what to do. We just fill in the gaps with knowledge, because if you're out there trying to do things without knowledge, without the facts, it's kind of like trying to do a computer program and not knowing what key to push, or how do I mute this in Zoom? Like if somebody shows you, it's like, oh, so we're going to try to show you. And today's message is kind of the heroes in the ground are your roots. The roots really determine success of your plant. And for many, many, many people who have studied and work with plants, many of us understand happy root, happy plant. If the roots are happy, the rest of the plant is able to fend off pests and diseases and just blossom and do really well. If the roots are unhappy, the rest of the plant's going to struggle. There's no way around that. So the root is the piece that we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to start sharing PowerPoint with you and talk through the PowerPoint. If you want to write in the chat box, Deirdre is going to help me with going through the chats, and maybe we raise some questions. If you actually want to ask a question, because there's so few of us right now, just unmute yourself and stop me and go, can you stop? And ask a question. Because there's just a small amount of traffic in what we have now, we can have a conversation if you like. So we'll stop once in a while and have a little conversation. So I'm going to start sharing the screen, and here we go. Oh, that's an apple tree in my yard. An apple tree that's been with me for a long time. It struggles. When it was planted, we had just moved here. There was a lot of construction, so the soil's very heavy. But we help it along over the years. But it would be a more productive apple tree if it had a healthier soil, a better soil. So let's talk about soils. Let's talk about roots. So let's start with this picture. On the right is a really healthy root system. And then we have these three. If you look at those three, now we get into the questions of why did they root the way they do? So can we answer that question? Well, it has to do primarily with the balance of air and water. That is the key, the air and the water. This one on the left, the media or the soil was up here, if you can see my cursor moving up here, and there were holes in the bottom of the flat. So the air and the water ratio in the media, over here's the media, the air and the water ratio in that media was perfect to grow roots. And the roots are like, let's go there. Let's be there, because that's where the perfect air and water ratio is. For us, if I go in a swimming pool, there's too much water. If I go into a desert, there's too much water. But there's this sweet spot that we live in, that's the right humidity. And that's what roots want. They want the space, they want the humidity. What happened here? Well, again, that was the right water and air ratio. Since the bottom is not black, it didn't rot. If it had rotted, I would say there was too much water in the media. But in this case, it was probably just surface watered. And no roots grow down here because it didn't get enough water down there. So that was the sweet spot. And what do we have here? Just right. It got just the right amount of air and water all the way through the profile. So whoever made this media up watered it properly, they put it into the pot properly, and they had the right mix of media components. Pretty simple. Give it what the root wants. So question here on your screen, if you have a pet, and a lot of us have pets, what do you provide it to keep it happy and healthy? So if you have a dog or a cat or a fish, what do you provide it? We've had dogs for years. My dog trains me, and it tells me what I want, what it wants to be happy. If we think we train our animals in a lot of ways train us. Well, you know what? Roots are going to train you too. So if you have a pet, do you leave it outside forever and ever? Do you not give it food? Do you not give it water? Do you give it the proper food and the proper water? Is it friends with you, or is it not a friend with you? Well, if you provide what your pet is asking you for, it's going to be happy and healthy. I don't know about the attitude, but so it's going to be happy and healthy. So below you see some pictures. This is a farm, and I don't know that you'd know where that farm is, but it's Wilson Farm, right in the Boston area itself, like very close to Boston. Very good deep soils. They do a tremendous business, but they grow food in the ground right next to Boston. Here's a beach. Beaches have very sandy soils. Do you know what kind of sand? And here's a forest soils. No organic matter at the beach, lots of organic matter in the forest. So that gets us started. What's underground? Well, we need to know our plants. And our plants have different types of root systems. We have fibrous root systems, we have tap roots, we have adventitious roots, and then we have storage organs called bulbs. There's a whole lot of different structures. But if we don't know what's underground and where it is, well, then how do we give it what it wants? Here's 3 pictures. What's the most common root system that will be found in the United States? Is it A? Is it B? Or is it C? So A is a taproot, B is a wide-spreading, very shallow, only about 18 inches, and C is deep and wide, not really past the drip line of the tree. So the answer to this is B. Most plants that we deal with in the United States have these pancake root systems. And why is that? Well, it has to do with air and water. Where's most of the air, oxygen available to the root system? Right up here on the surface. What kind of plant will have a taproot? Well, you say, well, a lot of plants have tap roots. I've dug them out. Okay, how far down have you dug? Have you ever dug a hole more than like 18 inches? That's a lot of work. We usually only dig down about 18 inches. How deep is corn? 6 inches. How deep is this oak tree? That oak tree is only 18 inches. But if you have sandy soils, in a sandy soil, or karst topography like we have in Schoharie County, where we have limestone with caves, we might have roots that will go very deep if there's the right amount of oxygen and water. So most of what you'll hear me talk about today is oxygen and water. I'm going to go back here. You have, or you will have, a number of different resources that I'm going to provide you today. And those resources will show you a number of different options for learning yourself. I've got a number of different videos that I'll share with you. I'm not going to run through all of them because it'll take too much time. But I thought I'd put this one up first. Dr. Ed Gilman retired from University of Florida about the same time I did. Ed and I went to grad school together, and Ed is probably the premier nursery production root specialist, pruning specialist, probably pruning mostly, that I know of in the United States with trees. So there's a link here to go to Ed's video series. So I'll just click on it now. So this takes you to the University of Florida. And Ed, over the years, put many, many, many videos up there. Here's an entire section on soils, nursery tree production, planting, pruning. So if you want to extend your knowledge, you may not need me. You could probably click on Ed's videos, and there's a lot. And he was a great teacher. I'd highly recommend just taking a look at the University of Florida at Gilman's video series. It's a really good video to watch.
We learn a lot from monocots. You know, the palms have a very different root system than dicots, than trees. And here at the base of a palm, you can see how the root initiation zone, which is close to the surface of the soil, constantly puts out new roots. And there's thousands of them, at least hundreds of them, if not 1,000. And they don't branch very much, and they're pretty small in diameter, about the size of a pen or a pencil. And this really helps hold the tree up very, very well. So, and they're very straight, right? So that's something that becomes very important, and probably one reason why palms are so resistant to hurricane damage and falling over in strong winds, because they've got just so many of these strong, straight roots. So let's then start with a seed from a dicot. This is an oak, after this brief introduction to the palms. So here we got an oak that there's about 8 or 10 different examples here. That taproot coming out, and on the left you can see no deflection at all. That taproot pretty much goes straight down. But in most of the other cases across to the right, you see increasing amounts of deflection by the taproot. And the taproot might hit a leaf right at the soil surface, right where that acorn happened to fall. It hits a leaf within a ½ inch and just makes a turn to the left. And that's just kind of bad news for the tree, because most of those trees don't make it. The folks that study such things say that about 1 in a billion, with the letter B, 1 in a billion seeds makes it to mature tree. So there's not much of a chance. So the tree on the left, in this case, is going to have the best chances of making it to a mature tree because it's starting off with a good root system. So that root system comes out, grows more, and there on the right, a little bit older. You can see the taproot has divided into 2. It's starting to bend a little bit and twist. The oxygen content is probably getting kind of low, a foot or 2 down. That slows the taproot, and you can see that gives rise or initiates surface roots.
So we'll just let you go visit that site to continue on with that if you want. I'm going to continue here. What I talked about primarily, and Ed just got to there, was that roots will grow only where there's opportunity. And that's really the best way to think about it, I think. Opportunity is, do I want to be there? Like, is there air and is there water? Is there space for me to grow? So roots are opportunistic. Roots don't grow toward water. They don't have a brain. They don't know like that water is somewhere. But when they find a space that has the right air and water and nutrients, they take advantage of it and they'll fill up that space. So if we look at this, this is a pretty common soil picture that's used for teaching. This is very fine particles. Over here to large particles with no fines. Well, what's the best condition? Well, fine particles is clay. Nothing goes through it. It absorbs a lot of water. It's just solid. And then where we have large particles with small particles, it doesn't drain either. We have large particles and more large particles. That doesn't drain either. So those of you that think adding sand to a soil is going to help it, well, good luck with that. Because sand generally is smaller particles. And if you've got a clay soil and you add sand to it, now you just made concrete. Sand, in most cases, will not fix anything as far as roots go unless there's a lot of sand, more than 75%. So where we get to this number, 75% sand, then roots are probably finding opportunity. But before that, all the spaces are filled up with fine material. Give the root opportunity and think of it as air. In most cases, we need air. In very sandy, gravelly soil, you probably have a water problem, but it's got to be sandy, gravelly, but it can't be fine material. Here's two examples of rooting systems, and I talk primarily about trees because I'm a tree person, but it relates to your garden vegetables also. So soil depth, where you have a deep soil, and we're probably talking a good quality riverbank soil, similar to the Hudson River Valley, the Mohawk River area, Schoharie Valley area, very deep soils. The Guernsey's nursery over here in Schoharie, they have 20 feet of topsoil. What's that mean? 20 feet of really good air and water and nutrient holding. My house, this is where that apple tree is growing. It's heavy soil, very deep, dense soils, and it doesn't drain well. So what does a plant on my property do? It spreads its roots out sideways. Why does it go sideways? Like the picture I showed you of most of the trees in the United States. It goes sideways because there's nothing deep that it wants. There's no opportunity. We have to give it opportunity for air and water and penetration of air and water. So here's an instance. Here's a tree off of Lake Pontchartrain in Louisiana, New Orleans. Crepe myrtles. Why are they doing well? Well, where's the root system? If that Lake Pontchartrain is all clay underneath, then these roots are probably spreading out sideways. And they're under the street, they're under the sidewalk. But if that's all sandy, well-drained soil, they're probably going down to a depth where the water level gets close. And then the water will stop them because there's no oxygen. They can't breathe. So roots have to breathe. I can't tell you which that is. It could be a taproot or it could be spreading. My sense is it's probably spreading. Here's a sandy soil. We've been to the beach. Sand dunes, they will tell you, will stop hurricane infiltration of the ocean. as opposed to concrete and stones. Concrete and stones have nothing to lock them together. This is a replanting of a dune after a hurricane. The root systems on these little grass plants go probably about 15 feet deep. Think of that. All these roots locked together with sand 15 feet deep. Why did those roots go that deep? There's the right air and water relationship there.
Question.
That's why. Yeah?
Question.
Yeah.
Don't sand dunes continually shift? Is there anything to the roots holding them from shifting?
Absolutely. So sand dunes will shift as water erodes away at root systems, but if there's no vegetation on those dunes are going to shift a lot. If you have a house at the beach or you visit at the beach, they tell you stay off the dunes. And they tell you to stay off the dunes because when you walk on these grass plants, you're going to kill these roots. You're going to disrupt the microorganisms that are in the soil. You're going to cause damage. And that damage, if I made a path from this house all the way down to the beach, where's the water going to go? It's going to cut through that path where I've killed off the vegetation, and then it will undermine the vegetation on each side. But beaches that have vegetation, those dunes don't shift much at all. They build as the sand blows in. The sand blows in and covers these plants, and then they grow more and more and more, unless they get totally covered, and then it will shift because the plants are dead. But from an engineering point, we all know that root systems work better than concrete. After the floods in Schoharie, on the Schoharie Creek, the solutions to some of the problems are to make sure that you have vegetation on the sides of the waterways. If you don't put vegetation on the sides of the waterways, what it does is it increases the velocity of the water, and water from Schoharie is going to hit Schenectady and wipe out Schenectady with high velocity. The idea is to put roots in the way to slow it down. So roots are going to capture it and they'll mold the dunes. What do roots need? So here's the list. They need water. They need gas exchange, which is what I'm talking about. They need to respire. You got to have the right temperature. Nutrition we'll talk about. And roots store nutrients, water, and sugar. Now we need to go on and actually talk about what the function of the root is. And it's a little challenging, but we actually learned this first, probably in 3rd grade. In 3rd grade, we were introduced to photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is the process of taking the sun's energy, the sun, and capturing the sun's energy. The leaf photosynthesizes, takes the sun's energy and makes sugar. And sugar is an organic compound. If you look up the word organic in the dictionary, there's 2 definitions. And the chemical definition is anything that's a carbon-containing compound. So sugar is that carbon-containing compound. And what the leaf does is it takes carbon dioxide from the air, mixes it with water, and then we get sugar. And we all know that plants give off oxygen. So what we learned about photosynthesis in 3rd grade, a lot of us learned that plants give off oxygen. Well, the key is that they make sugar. And what they do is they bind the energy of the sun in sugar. Really, 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 really important. They bind the energy of the sun in sugar. What do nutrients do? Nutrients are like the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium. Those are the nutrients, are the fertilizers that we add. They're mineral elements. They're not food. So when you go to the store and buy quote unquote plant food, you're not buying food. Nutrients are used for cell functions and cell structures. So let's take calcium, for example. Calcium in our bodies. What's it used for? Making bones. What's calcium used for in a plant? Making cell walls. What is magnesium used for in a plant? Running the photosynthetic process, but it doesn't run it. The thing that runs plants is sugar. The thing that builds plants are minerals. Sugar runs it, minerals build it. So photosynthesis, as we said, capture energy of the sun. Respiration. This is the word we really need to understand with roots, because we already know photosynthesis. Respiration is really, really important to understand. So respiration is the energy release. Here's my leaf. Photosynthesized, made sugar. What's it got to do now? It has to use the sugar for a whole bunch of things. So flying off the dock into my pond at home, what's got to happen? There's a lot of energy there. Like that person took the bike, rode down the ramp, flew off the ramp into the pond, released the energy. Where does that person get their energy? Actually, people get their energy from sugar from plants. So that process requires oxygen to release the energy of sugar. A root has sugar in it. How does the root grow? It needs oxygen. Photosynthesis needs carbon dioxide from the air, but roots need oxygen. It's gas in the soil, it's space. So why is respiration important? Here we go. You respire. Let's start over here. What's plant respiration? It's like breathing. When you breathe in, you take in oxygen. And your lungs, what they do is they take in the oxygen to be used to release the sugars in your body. You eat, and your body needs sugar for your energy. Jumping in the pond, need the sugar. What your lungs do is they're going to take the carbon dioxide out of your blood, and they're going to use the oxygen to release the sugars. Same thing a root does. The root needs oxygen to break the sugars down, and then the root's got to get rid of carbon dioxide in the soil, and it's got to get out of the soil. So gas exchange, really important. Now, what is that energy used for? Everything. What do you use sugar for? Well, staying alive, maintaining your health. You don't grow leaves, stems, and roots, but plants need to grow. Flowers and fruits need a lot of sugar. Seed growth, surviving dormancy, everything. So the sugar from photosynthesis has to get to the root for the plant to function. And then the root can be a hero. I'm not going to talk much about this, but transpiration is actually movement of the nutrients and water from the root to the top of the plant. So let's talk about that process for a little bit. Where does the root get its food from? Well, where's food made? Food is made from photosynthesis in the top of the plant. How does food get to the root? Well, the food's got to be transported through transport mechanisms, through cells that move the sugar and the water and nutrients to the root. Hormones, everything's got to come down through the plant to the root. So you have to get anything made by the leaves to the root, and it's got to go through the stem. How does water or nutrients get up the plant? Well, water and nutrients have to come in to the root, and then they go up through these tubes on the inside of your plant, the conducting system, and they get to the leaf. So here's the system. Nutrients and water go in, go up the stem to the leaf. Leaf photosynthesizes, makes sugar. Sugar has to go to the root because the root's starving. The root needs food. And then the root gets its food, and now I can bring in more water and nutrients. Just a cycle. So here's your cycle. Nutrient and water up, food down. The carbon fixation is sunshine, photosynthesis. Here's an important thing. I think you ought to understand. This does not occur with all plants, but it's a good way to think about it. And it's called the priority system. If you think about plants this way, you'll understand why roots suffer. The first place to get fed, leaves will photosynthesize, make sugar. First place to get fed are flowers and fruits. All living life will take care of its babies. So flowers and fruits get food first. Even if the leaf needs food, flowers, give it to them. Then the leaves are the second order of getting food. The stems will then get food. And guess what's the last place to get fed? The roots. And if you ask most people that don't study plants, what gets food first, they'll say, oh, the root, the photosynthate goes from the leaves to the roots. No, not until the rest of the plant's really well fed. So how do you get the root fed if the root's struggling? The root will not get fed. So think about the priority system. You got to get everything fed first. Now here's tree food for an entire year, and this might help. Let's say it's September. Plants go the entire year. It's had a really great year. The sun's been out. It's rained a lot. You got nutrients. People fertilize your roots. But the plant's just really, really happy. So root system is full. This is the root system. And this could be the plant system, actually. This could be the entire plant. So the plant's full of food. And think about it as a refrigerator. I like to use a Hershey bar comparison. In September, my refrigerator is full of Hershey bars, a lot of sugar and nutrients. And then we get to October, November, December, January, February. There's no leaves. It went dormant. It can't photosynthesize. So where does it get its food from? Stored food. All the food is stored in that plant with no leaves on it. So how many months with no leaves? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 months. The plant's got to live on its Hershey bars in the refrigerator. Well, that's not going to work well. But if it had a good year and started out with the refrigerator full, now the root system and the plant can make it through the winter. What happens in spring? The buds swell, still no food. Now the leaves come out. Where's the food from the leaves go? Well, it doesn't go to the root. Some of it goes. This is just being dramatic, but most of it goes to flowers, fruits, and leaves. So the refrigerator is getting empty of sugar. Now we get to June or July, and because of the heat, the leaves stop growing, the stems stop stretching as much, they're not growing, and the plant's filling up with food. So now we go back to plant refilling. And then we get to August, and we should be full again. That's the regular system of a plant. Now let's throw you one little hitch here. What if you have a drought in August? You're at this point with the tree's not full, the plant's not full of sugar. So you go into winter at this level. So when do you see damage on a plant from drought in August? You don't see damage on a plant from drought in August till the next year, because the plant's got enough food to get through winter. But what it doesn't have is it doesn't have enough food to grow the next year. So drought is usually a next year problem. And we usually think, oh, it had a bad winter. Most plants are designed to take winter. They're not designed to going into winter without food. So you get the idea? You got to get food to the root. Happy root, happy plant. So what do you do to provide your pet, your plant, your root, what it needs? You need information. You need to know what the plant needs. Here's a honey locust. You need to know the climate in the area and the climate of the soil. And you need to know your soils. You see this picture? Those are honey locusts on top of a parking garage. Whoever designed the media for those plants to grow in knew they had to provide irrigation, had to provide space for those trees to grow. Wonderful, wonderful horticulturalists there. They just understood what roots need. So pretty simple. Roots need space. Roots need water. Roots need nutrients. We're not going to talk about a whole lot, but roots need a microbe environment. Soils are alive. And when we do a soil presentation in a few weeks, soils are alive. If they're dead, then the roots are not as happy. They need companionship. Soils have structure. Just like a building, they have structure. And what we usually do not want in our soil is we don't want fine particles. We want coarse particles with some fines, but very fine particles will plug up the system. So what shouldn't you add to your soil? Very, very fine material. Unless you add a little bit, and a little bit helps to glue it together. Understand that the soils have to respond. There has to be respiration, gas exchange. So do we have any questions?
Not yet.
Okay.
I did provide the link in the chat for everyone for the Florida videos from Dr. Gilman.
Okay. All right. So we'll go back. What do we? Oh, we're almost an hour. So let's look at a few particles. We have sphagnum moss, which is probably, if we harvest sphagnum peat moss from peat bogs throughout the world, we can't really replace it, but it is one of the best soil amendments. And why is sphagnum peat moss so good? Well, let's start out with what sphagnum is. It's a plant. There it is. And then we harvest the plant and we decompose it. That's decomposed, and it's partially decomposed. So we still have pieces of plants and decomposition. And what's great about it is peat moss acts like a sponge. If you take a sponge and squeeze it and then let go of it, you'll squeeze out the extra water. It'll have air in it. It'll have water in it. It has space to grow. Great. And then also, sphagnum peat moss will hold on to nutrients. Great, great, great material. We need to replace it because it's not earth friendly to continue to harvest as much peat as we do. Sand, on the other hand, sand is inert. It doesn't hold any nutrients. It can be very variable. It can be quartz. It can be limestone. It can be angular. It can be round. Particle sizes, if it's all fine sand, that's no good. If it's all coarse sand, that's not good. Mixed sizes, you don't want fines in. I would probably almost never use sand unless it was larger angular particles with no fine material. The benefits of sand are just limited. It's not a great substance. When we talk nutrients, we'll talk nutrients in the soils presentation, but the nutrient that you need to be familiar with is nitrogen. All plants need nitrogen, period. So if there's a way to feed plants, we really talk about nitrogen as a nutrient, but nitrogen's necessary for protein synthesis and building of cells. It helps run the factory. The phosphorus, the potassium, the iron, the calcium, they're important, but not as important as nitrogen. And in most soils, sandy soil, you probably don't have much nitrogen because sandy soils won't hold anything. You need organic matter in that soil. So what do we do in sandy soils? Add organic matter, add organic matter. What do we do in heavy soils? Actually add organic matter, because in a heavy soil, the organic matter will spread out those fine particles. Sandy soil, you need organic matter to hold nitrogen. Phosphorus has been in many, many fertilizers for years. Now it's banned from a lot of fertilizers because it's a significant pollutant. Very rare that you need phosphorus. Potassium's an interesting one. Potassium, overall water health. So those of us that go to the doctor fairly regular, you know what they tell you? Drink water, drink water, drink water. Well, potassium helps with that water health. It helps move water through the plant. So you may sometimes have potassium problems because, like nitrogen, it leaches. Phosphorus does not leach. Iron and calcium, you can see what they do. The factors of nutrients for roots. You have to have nutrient holding. Sandy soils don't have much organic matter. They don't have clay. So around these particles, you have clay or you have organic matter. You need to hold nutrients. The other factor of nutrients is availability. pH is something you may have heard about. Acid soils are less than 5, basic soils greater than 6.5. If you have a pH of 5 to 6.5, you're fine. What the pH does is it makes available to the root those nutrients that are being held. If you don't have the right pH, the nutrients getting to the root are not at the right ratio. So the pH is really vital here, and the organic matter in the soil. One comment about organic fertilizers and chemical fertilizers. When you get down to the cellular level, to the root level, a root does not know the difference between an organic fertilizer and a chemical fertilizer. The nitrate, the NO3, or the ammonium, NH4, the root does not know if it's from an organic source or not. So from that standpoint, it doesn't matter if we use chemical or organic. But the benefit of the organic is organics are complexes. So when we add an organic nitrogen, we're adding not just nitrogen, we're adding micronutrients, we're adding large complexes of compounds that are very, very beneficial to the plant. So why choose an expensive organic fertilizer over a chemical? Just from the standpoint of soil health, the organic helps the soil community, the living biomass, and the chemical composition and the structure. The chemical type just supplies the chemical. So if you just need the chemical, that's fine. But if you want more soil health, your organic one will give you the complex. So just a few things. You need opportunity. Does snow help us? Absolutely. Snow insulates the soil and keeps the soil at a normal temperature. If we don't have snow, we have soil that bounces up and down in temperature and goes dry and wet. Snow is great. What's the problem with this soil? Well, the groundwater is so high, everything that grows in this field has surface roots, because anything down deep is going to rot. Let's talk cover crops real quick. Cover crops are plants that we plant on the ground with the intention of plowing them in. What's the benefit? Calcium absorption, nitrogen, phosphorus, it all gets plowed back in. And we have sugar sources, not that plants can take up sugar, but here's a row of sunflowers. Those sunflowers were used for cut flowers, and then they were plowed into the ground to return nutrient to the soil. And the roots of these will open up the soil because the roots will take space and they expand spaces in soils. So cover crops are great. Plant them in the fall, plow them in. I'm going to skip through some of these. Let's talk about raised beds just a minute. One of the things that you'll find today that a lot of people are doing is they're growing their plants in raised beds. Why? Well, you know what? The roots are happier there. And I don't have to bend down as much to work in it. But we're not growing in our native soil. If you put a raised bed up and then put your regular topsoil in the raised bed, well, why'd you do that other than you didn't want to bend over? What people do is they fill the raised beds with materials that are loose. The roots can go all the way down. There are usually lots of organic matter, and every year you have to top it up because organic matter is carbon dioxide and water. As the organic matter decomposes, it disappears because it's carbon and hydrogen, organic matter turns into air. So we have to top up our organic beds every year. This is I won't show you it, but if you click on this link, this is a link to a pretty good write-up on raised beds, compost, and the materials that you might put in. But your raised bed, you need soil structure, something that roots will go through. You need depth, so the roots can go deep. It's got to be aerated. If you pick the right soil, it's aerated. It's got to have nutrient holding, water holding. You're providing the root, your pet, what it wants. That's why they work so well, unless you fill it with junk. We also have to think about something I teach all my classes. I taught all my classes. Think of this. You're not smarter than the rest of the world. Every solution you come up with will cause a problem. So my raised bed, what's my problem? I might have put in the wrong soil. I might have not made it deep enough. I might overwater it. I might not have enough water. But here's two situations. Here's a tree on a construction site. Where do people park their vehicles on construction sites? Right under the tree. How far out from that tree would you need to put a fence to protect it? Probably another 20 feet past the drip line, because all of the important roots are right where that truck is and right where that tractor is. When they were done this project, you know what they did? They cut the tree down because it was dead. Here's a solution to, I have a building that I put in, and I have a tree I want to save. So let's put a little hole around the tree and put rocks around it. That tree died. The roots are buried 4 feet deep. They can't breathe. And when that hole filled with water, ice filled it, and the ice expanded and broke the bark. You might say that's dumb. It's just like thoughtlessness, or just, I didn't understand that roots need to breathe. We do this all the time. Why do we cut roots along sidewalks? Well, because the root's going to lift the sidewalk. Well, you know your tree's going to fall over, or you know the tree is going to die because the roots have to provide the top with water and nutrients. Why does a root go underneath the sidewalk as opposed to in the ground? What's under the sidewalk? Air. Why does the sidewalk lift? The top of the root expands. The bottom of the roots generally don't expand. But what does a root want under a sidewalk? It's the air and the stones. If the soils around it are very dense, the roots are going to pick the air spot. Here's a really neat way of growing. This is called Missouri River gravel growing. This is a gravel bed. It's all pea gravel. Bare root plants are put into the pea gravel. And then this is the root system that developed. Why did it grow a palm root system? Why did it grow this massive structure of roots? Well, because there's space. There's air. They got irrigation. They put nutrition. They put chemical nutrients through the tubing, and they just feed it nitrogen. Really almost not much else. But that's an amazing root system. You know what? When you transplant that, that tree doesn't die. Unless you put it in a soil that's not compatible with it. This is a video of structured soils. I think we'll skip through that. The living ecosystem is probably the last part of what we would talk about today. Our plants grow in an environment. And that environment is alive. There's bacteria, there's worms, there's insects, there's fungi, and they all work in consort together. So one of the new topics today is plants talking to each other. So I have a link to a talk by Susan Simard, and she has done a lot of work with root collaboration. And root collaboration is fungal networks that connect trees, and trees, help nutrients, help water. It's all a system. So where you don't provide the right space, temperature, organic matter, microorganisms, your root, your pet is not as happy. Where we put chemical fertilizers down, we may change the pH of the soil and kill off some of our microorganisms or our earthworms, or we may have invasive earthworms. The concept is, think of this as an entire ecosystem. What you have to avoid is the sensationalization of some of these talks to think that plants have brains and communicate as if they have a brain. Do plants have consciousness? Well, we could talk a long time about that. But definitely the transfer of nutrients from one plant to another, from older plants to younger plants, that occurs through the living ecosystem in the soil. And I can play just a piece of this TED Talk.
Imagine you're walking through a forest. I'm guessing you're thinking of a collection of trees, what we foresters call a stand, with their rugged stems and their beautiful crowns. Yes, trees are the foundation of forests, but a forest is much more than what you see. And today, I want to change the way you think about forests. You see, underground, there is this other world, a world of infinite biological pathways that connect trees and allow them to communicate and allow the forest to behave as though it's a single organism. It might remind you of a sort of intelligence. How do I know this? Here's my story. I grew up in the forests of British Columbia. I used to lay on the forest floor and stare up at the tree crowns. They were giants. My grandfather was a giant
Support
too.
for
He
this
was a horse
podcast and
logger.
the following message.
If I can stop it.
I did place the link in the chat, so everyone has that.
Okay. So I had only one more thing and I lost it all.
I was talking to Chris earlier, everybody, and this last talk that he just brought up is part of the course that I'm taking at Cornell right now. And the course is this is only the third year that they've offered it. It's brand new and very intense. There is a lot of information. So I have seen this TED Talk. It is amazing.
All right, so we're at the end, and I hope what I transferred to you was that final presentation, that TED Talk, the idea that there's this underground network environment that it's vital to understand. And for a root, if I'm a root, can you please provide me what I need? It can be very challenging to understand what to provide. So the little bits of information that you gain, of the thing that I found most students take away from the root discussion is, I need to provide roots space, they need oxygen to breathe, and we all know they need water and nutrients. So what do I do to make that happen? So the next discussion that we would do is talking about soils. But for now, try to gain an understanding of what roots need. And should I go drive my vehicle over top of a soil by a tree? Well, no. Should I take a rototiller and dig up the soil with my rototiller and make it nice and fluffy? Well, no. Well, then what should I do? Try to let the soil be itself. One of the things that's been done at Cornell is to develop something called scoop and dump technology. And scoop and dump is pretty simple stuff. You take a backhoe for a large area and you scoop up the soil and you dump it. You scoop it and you dump it. What you don't do is turn it into a very fine material. So soils are like a house. We have walls. We have houses that are built of studs. So we have standing structures that hold the wall together. Then we put sheetrock up. Then we put furniture in, and now we're filling in the spaces. So we have sand, silt, and clay and soils. Now we put some water in, we put some air in, we put some nutrients in, and we're starting to fill the house with furniture and refrigerators and people. And now we become a hoarder, and a hoarder is fill it in with fine material. And now you can't live in a house anymore. That's a soil. If you come along with a rototiller or an excavator and you crush the house, you don't have a soil, you just have pieces. So don't take the rototiller and destroy the soil. Be gentle with it. So gentle with the environment, gentle with components. Understand that soils are living. And the worst thing you can do is blow it up. So I think that's probably where we'll stop for now with...
We do have a question in the chat.
Yeah. So if you want to, there's only a few of you, if you want to unmute or if you want to type an answer. Is there anything else? How do appropriate plants?
My question was, you have plants that can grow along stream beds and in rain gardens where there's a preponderance of water. How do they breathe?
Okay, so really good question. What would we know? What I didn't do was I didn't spend any time on species. For trees, what's the difference between the growth of a red oak root and a red maple root? Well, red oaks go down. Red maples go sideways. So which one can take less oxygen? The red oak, possibly. So what I'd say about rain garden plants or plants that grow along streams is they've got adaptations for growing in low oxygen soils. Interesting thing is if you study plants that are in low oxygen environments and swamps, which plants do the best in cities? Plants that grow in swamps. Why? Because city soils are low oxygen. They have adaptations to doing that. If we look at an interesting thing with a lot of wetland species, like your cattails, and I didn't know this for a long time, you study a little bit, but cattails, when they release their seed, when the seed germinates, is usually early spring or in the fall. And what cattail needs for germination is it can't have standing water. Cattails get a lot of oxygen through their stems. So they get oxygen down through the stem to the root system somehow. I don't know how. But if you try to germinate cattail seeds in water, they die. They have to get their root down into oxygen and water first. And once they have their root down and they develop the top, now somewhere in that system is a method of getting oxygen to the root system because the plant knows it's got to breathe. And it's got an adaptation for growing in the water. Some plants have air-filled leaves that they'll get the oxygen, bring the oxygen in that way. I don't know that system, but it's usually modifications of the plants.
Okay. I have one more question.
Yeah.
Is there a way to undo the damage that is caused by rototilling a new plant bed, a new garden bed?
Yeah. So my answer to almost every situation is organic matter.
Okay.
Compost, peat moss. I usually like to start with peat moss because peat moss to me is so reliable. But the interesting thing even about peat moss is if you buy peat moss, if you could find peat moss from, let's say, Ireland, Scotland, they harvest it in chunks. When you get it from Canadian sources, they grind it up into small particles. Like, I want the chunks.
Right.
If you had composted wood chips, not fresh, but composted, those will work pretty well because they still have kind of that spacing integrity. So I would look for a product that horse manure. Cow manure to me is much too fine. Horse manure's problem is it's got weeds in it. But if it's composted properly, that's good. Leaf mold a little bit too dries a little bit, but any of those things that are going to spread out the soil that you've just tilled, then you could almost go in on a pretty regular basis and just incorporate organic matter on the top where you're going to plant your garden. Don't go real deep because most of your plants are going to be growing on the top. Get it loosened up on the top.
Okay.
Chris, a combination that I use for working into the gardens prior to planting is mushroom compost and, believe it or not, pine bark mulch.
Yeah, and pine bark mulch.
And then I use the pine bark mulch as my mulch. Because I do a lot of work with perennials, so.
Yeah. I'm going to go back and see if I can dig this up. There was a video I wanted to show you of media, and somehow I missed it. And again, it's in the Ed Gilman videos.
Where do you get mushroom compost?
Most garden centers will carry it. You're in, where are you, in Esperance?
No, Amsterdam.
You're in Amsterdam. Oh, somewhere in Amsterdam should carry it. Chris, Sue that used to be in our class, she and her dad own a greenhouse up there in Amsterdam. What's her last name? Oh man, I can't think of it. But most greenhouses, it's an up and coming product. It's a waste product from the mushroom industry.
Okay.
And it's got it's not just mushrooms. There's a whole bunch of stuff in it.
Okay.
But you should be able to find it. I can get it at one of my little local, where I did my internship for SUNY Cobleskill. He was the one who actually introduced me to it, and I've bought a pallet from him before to do different jobs and whatnot. But yeah, it's a really good, rich. It's kind of heavy. It holds moisture. It's clumpy, like Chris was talking about with the peat moss. But it's not fine. It's very friable. It's really, I love it. I love working with it. I even use it in my container gardens. I mix it in with my stuff.
I'll try to get that. Thank you.
So what's interesting about if you go to, I can't find it. If you go to most of the garden centers, the big ones, the small ones, probably 5-10 years ago, a lot of them carried piles and piles of fertilizer bags. And today they don't carry many fertilizer bags because of the phosphorus pollution issues. And that phosphorus has been banned. So now what you find very commonly in garden stores are pallets and pallets of organic matter. all kinds of compost. They've got raised bed mixes. They've got garden mixes. All of those are going to work for your soil. And they've been, they're pretty reliable for your garden or your raised beds because there are all different types of mixes of compost. It could be cow manure, it could be mushroom compost, but if you go to those garden stores today, you're not going to find fertilizer bags like you used to. You're going to find those mixes, and they might have fertilizer in them, but that's, to me, it's not so much what it is. It's try whatever you can find, and if it works in your garden, it works, and if it doesn't, stop using it. It's kind of like I go to the doctor, I'm like, hey doc, like my foot hurts. Well, what are you doing? Well, I'm running. Well, why don't you stop?
Don't run.
So yeah. Anything else?
Not for me. I very much enjoy your classes, and I certainly will sign up for the next one. But are the classes going to be at